Hello everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Exchanged podcast with me, your host, Christopher Pietroni. The podcast is brought to you by the University of Birmingham, where I am Professor of Leadership Practice and Director of the Birmingham Leadership Institute. On this podcast, we ask whether we have the right kind of leadership for the challenges that we are facing, or whether we need to exchange our current approaches for something new. In today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Paul Richardson. Paul has success in an extraordinary diverse range of sectors, from waste management to retail to fashion, e-commerce, cybersecurity, and most recently football. Starting at 18 in his dad's skip hire business in the 1970s, Paul's well known for being one of the key figures behind Gymshark, a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise. And most recently, Paul's behind the Gen Z fashion brands Hera and more recently, a pre-loved platform, Haru. So we're going to explore a wide range of themes with Paul today. And Paul, welcome. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. Paul, it's been fascinating reading about your career. And generally, when you're written about and when you're interviewed, you're written up as this successful businessman, entrepreneur, which of course you are. You know, you've done an extraordinary amount of things. You've taken businesses, you've grown them, you've created jobs, you've made a lot of money. But when I look at your career, the thing that really stands out for me is that you seem to me to be somebody who is an innovator, a disruptor, and that's really been behind a lot of your success. Is that how you see yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really see that and didn't really understand the word disruptor until we got to Gymshark. And, you know, Gymshark was probably the disruptor of its time. But when I look back into waste management and look at what I did there back in the day, just as a for instance, in waste management sort of skip hire businesses back in the day, in building sites, you only put skips on and everyone just threw everything into one skip. And we came up with an idea that recycling needed to be sort of brought to the forefront, and building sites didn't do that. So we decided to talk to a company that's not here now, Tarmac. It was a very big Midlands company back in the day, had lots of sites building houses and buildings. And we talked to them and put on their sites containers and skips for all of the different types of waste, so wood, cardboard, canteen waste, building rubble, etc., etc. So I had many different skips on site. Right. So when we suggested it, and sort of people were like, they won't do that, but they did, because it saved them money. It was much better for their environmental policy and everything. So even in those days, I sort of look back now and I didn't realise it, but that was a disruption in itself.
So it's really interesting, because you say it in this really matter-of-fact way. It's kind of like, oh, we came up with this idea, but it came from somewhere. The impetus to think differently came from, where did that come from?
You have to think differently. If you want to stay ahead, if you're going to keep doing the same, you're just going to get the same. So for me, anytime I'm constantly thinking about new ways to do things, and I love taking sort of ideas from other sectors to bringing it into the sector you're in. So looking at Birmingham City Football Club at the moment, football's run as football, and my belief, looking at it most recently, it's sort of a bit behind. And as a for instance, there's 20,000 people or 30,000 people go to the ground. I'm very interested in what they have as an experience on that day, on the Saturday. But what about all the other days? And what about the 50,000, the 1 million people that are outside that you can bring in somehow? So, I'm constantly looking now at things like that, just at the football side of what can we bring in from the e-commerce that was working, what can we bring in from another sector, etc. So you always have to look, you have to stay ahead, and another thing, I used to work 7 days a week, which, might be frowned upon today. But the way I looked at it was, when I had my skip hire companies way back, was that if I worked 7 days, most of my competition were working 5 to 5.5. So by the time the end of the year came, I was 80 to 100 days ahead of them before they even started. So that to me wasn't something that took a university degree to get, or, I had to do anything for. It was just basically I was working harder, I was working more. So again, it's just things like that.
But that's something else that strikes me about your success, Paul, is that you've quite often been sort of on the boundary of something, like not exactly on the outside, but not exactly on the inside either. So like No Waste, even you were actually in another company, and you were giving a perspective into No Waste. Gymshark, you were sort of brought in. You weren't one of the founders. You mentioned earlier Birmingham City Football Club, and you're thinking about that from the perspective of somebody who's been in other sectors. I mean, do you see yourself that way, and how significant do you think that's been for you?
I quite like helicopter view.
Right.
So again, with Steve Hewitt at Gymshark, he sort of invented that for me, because we were very fortunate, and I think that was one of the successes of Gymshark, was able to have someone with that helicopter view, constantly looking at where people were going and saying, don't go down there, that's a dead end. That is one of the things I do. I like to be high level. It's very difficult if you're not actually right in the depths of it to see in the depths of it, but you can see high level and work with the people who are in the deep end.
I just wanted to explore this idea of adaptation a bit more, and in particular in relation to growing companies, because that's been a big feature of your career as well. And you've worked with a number of companies, right all the way back to the skip hire business, where sometimes quite successful companies have then stratospherically successful, and obviously Gymshark's the one that you're probably best known for, and people will know the brand. I think when you first got involved with Gymshark, it was already pretty successful, right? I mean, it was a bit, not exactly a mum and pop store, but it was a little fly by the seat of your pants, but it was doing okay.
Yeah, it was about 4.5 million, around about 8 people in the business. So it was run a little bit. I mean, Ben and Lewis ran it almost like a bit of a laugh. It was a bit of a joke. It was great fun for them. Young guys, sort of 19, 20, earning money, driving a couple of nice cars. So yeah, I mean, by comparison to a lot of businesses, and businesses that I developed in my day, really, really hard work, it had come quite easy, but they were onto something really good at that time. They'd hit on something very innovative with the way how they developed it. But yeah, it was early doors, but it lacked structure in any way, shape or form. So the thing is, and again, this is a Steve Hewitt analogy, it's like they've got a house and they wanted to put an extension on, another extension, but the foundations were all on sand.
Yeah.
So, the house itself is going to start to wobble. Never mind, you put an extension on, it's going to literally collapse. And that's what they hadn't got. So that was one of my specialities is seeing that the foundations need to be put in as much as possible and as much as you can afford, because you can't do that sometimes in the way that maybe we did at Gymshark, because it was very successful and very cash rich at the time. So we could easily go, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. Sometimes you can't afford to do that. But I think having in your head as a business person that you want to do that, it's the right thing. So for argument's sake, rather than when you get your first load of money and go and you're buying yourself a Lamborghini, put that money into the foundations of your company, and then that will help it grow.
And just to give people a sense of the growth trajectory here. So it goes from about 4 million in when did you first get involved?
It was 4.5 million at the end of 13.
And then becomes famously a unicorn, over $1 billion.
Yeah, current turnover is going to be ballparking 500 million.
Right. Okay.
Roughly speaking, in 10 years.
Right. So phenomenal growth. Yeah. So many organisations really struggle with that sort of growth, particularly when there's a founder or two founders in this case involved, and I guess a pretty small staff when they began, probably people they knew.
Yeah, it was friends and relatives.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So the growth is wonderful, but it's also going to change everybody's life in lots of ways. Their working life, the way that they imagine what this company is, what their job is. All sorts of new people are going to come in, people they didn't know. Whole loads of change. How do you, having been through that, what do you see as the kind of leadership challenges of taking people through that journey?
So it's several. Again, when Ben and Lewis, I sat them in my office. It was actually No Waste office at the time, because I was still with No Waste. There's a transition period where I was helping them, and I asked them what they wanted to do with the company, because again, they were mini successful what they did, and I said, what do you want to do with the business? You've got a nice lifestyle business here, which is fine. And they said, no, we want to be as big as Under Armour. I said, okay, that means there's lots and lots of change you've got to go through, and there's going to be some of it you don't like, for absolute certain, some of it you don't like, and you're going to need to adapt and grow with that change. And there's several things. People, one of them. Business is about people. You're going to need to hire people much better than you, and that is a given at their particular sector or section or whatever they do, or their talent has to be much better than you, and that can be quite hard for people. So I know Lewis, he struggled with that at the time, and eventually left the business, whereas Ben realised that was the way growth went, and that's one of the main ingredients for growth is people, putting the right people in the right place, and that for me is the hardest thing that anyone has to do.
Yeah, this thing about risk is really interesting, isn't it? I mean, you're an entrepreneur, right? That's all about
risk.
It's all about risk taking. Yeah. So, do you see yourself as a risk taker?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Do you enjoy it? I mean, is that the experience?
Yeah. I mean, it's part of it. It's the high of it. Yeah. I mean, it's when you get it right. But as long as you get more right than wrong, you can't get them all right. But I enjoy doing things that other people wouldn't do, trying to be ahead of the curve as much as you possibly can. I'm probably not the very, very first mover. I'm probably just a little bit behind that. I'd love to be that first mover sometimes and just, see something completely no one's ever seen. But, I'm just probably a little bit behind that is the way I look at it.
It does come across as you speak, Paul, that there is a sort of, a values base, right? There's something that motivates you about, I don't know what it is, being decent to people or being a good human being. There's something that sort of infuses the way that you try to exercise your leadership.
I think it pays in the long term. Look, it doesn't always work. In business, you're in business, and things happen within the business that sometimes don't go quite right or whatever. But I always look long term if I possibly can. So I look in businesses for not a supplier, but someone it's almost like a relationship, because there's a time when I might need them to get me out of a hole. Can you get me that material quicker? And if you're, I'll say nice to them, if you're respectful to them, you don't have to be their friend. They're not your friend, it's business. But respect there might get you that quicker, so that to help you out when you've got a problem. And then sometimes when they can't deliver to you, you don't rip their heads off. It's a case of saying, okay, I've got to understand what they're going through. Is it logical? Is it okay? Or are they taking the mickey?
Yeah.
Being firm and fair. I think it works. It works long term, because you go up, you come down, you go up, you come down. My life it's been like this. It's not just one nice easy line.
I think that this holding a kind of attitude of curiosity is a really important part of leadership, and I think we really struggle with it. And I think one of the reasons is because it's exhausting.
Yeah, right? It's hard work.
Yeah.
People don't like hard work, really, do they? They want everything needs to come easier. And I always say to people talk to me about balance of work and life and things like that. And I don't know any successful person that I've ever met, whether that's an Olympian, a footballer, a business person, a leader of some description in government or whatever. It doesn't matter who hasn't had to work really, really hard. It's very, very, I don't know any. So hard work comes into it all the time. And I think if you wire yourself for hard work and expect it, then it's not a surprise. Oh my God, this is hard. No, actually, I was expecting it. It's going to be hard. You're just going to run a marathon So you're not thinking, well, that's going to be easy. It's going to be hard. Even if you're the best and the world record holder, it's going to be hard, some description. Different level of difficulty probably than if I ran it or tried to run it. But I think if you expect it and are ready for hard work, I lift. I'm a lifter at the gym. And, if I've got a couple of 100 kilos on the floor to do a deadlift, I know it's not going to be as easy as lifting 100. So I've got to set everything ready, get my mind ready, get my body ready to take that 200 off the floor. But if I walk up to it thinking it's going to be just dead easy, it's not going to come off the floor.
Yeah.
And it's going to feel really hard. But if I prepare myself, get myself in the right headspace, get the right form, execute it, it will feel easier.
And that getting yourself in the right headspace, and that sort of preparation that you do in the moment when you're lifting is also, seems to me, connected to what I know is another interest of yours, which is around supporting mental health and mental well-being. Because the work that you've done, the highs, the lows, the risks that you've had to hold, risks that have gone wrong, as well as the ones that, have gone well. The success can be as hard as the failure sometimes. So staying mentally well through that kind of process must have been demanding for you in the way that it is for everybody in organisations.
Yeah. Again, I think it's getting ready for it and expecting it. So if you're going to put yourself under pressure, you're going to have times when you won't feel as good about yourself for whatever reason. That could be physically and mentally. So for me, in terms of my regime in terms of fitness and vitamins, in my bag down there'll be all my vitamins for the day and things like that. I drink a lot of water and stuff stuff I've learned over time that I probably didn't do when I was younger, but you can get away with it when you're younger. Preparing yourself ready for that. Same mentally, I think you cannot be successful or want to be successful without having some form of issues at some point. So again, open yourself up. So I'm a massive advocate for counselling. People to talk to who have no agenda with you. They're not your mate who's just going to agree with you, but will challenge you about yourself and why you think the way you do or the way you're feeling, etc. So for me is making sure that you're open to it and not waiting for it to all go completely wrong. Preparing yourself mentally and physically, I think, is really important.
And do you see this support for sort of mental health and well-being as being sort of, part of a good business?
100%. Yeah, again, at Gymshark, I brought in something there, which they now use it's called Deload now. So we brought in loads of experts around. We was a psychologist, a psychiatrist, dietitians, because again, dietary stuff is huge in the sort of gym industry and around there. That's eating disorders, but again, disordered eating is equally as bad. We had a GP and had all those sort of people around. So I will carry that through now to every company that I deal with in terms of trying to make sure that they have, healthcare and help wherever they need it, and push them forwards and make sure that people are being spoken to and their mental health is being considered at all times. But also giving them the expectation that if we are going to be a successful company and we are going to be pushing the boundaries, we're also going to be pushing those boundaries a little bit. So you have to get ready for it. Be prepared, I think, is one of the things. If you're going into it completely blind and blasé, then different. But if you're ready for it, you can prepare yourself for it.
Do you find still that you'll find you get resistance? People saying, well, it's going to come off the bottom line, and we're not a mental health organisation.
No, I think people are getting better. I think they go. What I'm not keen on is the token gesture thing. I think there was an advert at one point. It might have been. I won't say the company. It doesn't matter. But sticking the post-it notes on their head and stuff like that. I think campaigns, in my mind, are a little bit. For me, it's not about just doing a campaign. I know it can heighten awareness, but for me, it's about what you do on a constant heartbeat basis all the time. It's not just what you do when someone's either ill and then you sort it out, is you just keep doing it on a constant heartbeat basis. Give people the outs. For me, company counsellors, having someone that you can send your people to, they don't have to think about it. They don't have to think about paying for it. They go straight to that person. It's completely private, but you've got that person that they can refer to as a counsellor. I'd have that everywhere I go if I could.
It seems to be another theme for you, Paul, is that you never want to say it's a trade-off between the bottom line and doing the right thing. It's when you can align those two things that real change happens. Is that right?
People are not stupid. They work out when companies are doing things for the sake of it. So they work out when a diversity type scenario is being almost like crafted. Your consumer will work that out, your staff will work that out. When you're doing something with a true heart, so at Hera, for instance, we have quite a large gay community in our customer base, and I was just interested, and I asked some people that I know, okay, what do we do to help this out without it being sort of crafted? And they gave me the answers. It was, you support something constantly. You don't just go in on pride and do something on a big splash and put it all over your website and then you disappear again. You constantly support things. And I think it's the same with mental health. It's a constant heartbeat of things rather than just an advertising brand awareness campaign. For me is, you're doing something, you can't have every type of different person in your, roster. That's just crafted. Oh, we've got to have that type of person and that type of person. That's not actually real. That's just putting it out there. People in your business should be diverse. People you associate with should be diverse in all the different ways. But also they have to be the right person for the job or the contract or whatever you've got to do. Because that comes first as well. Because that's the commercial trade-off. In my head, it has to work for both.
When you're pushing these boundaries, when you're or at times in your career when you have been, when you've been making the case for mental health support, you've been making the case to support people who might be customers of yours, but in that case like people from LGBTQ identities and so on. Are you aware that's leadership? That because without you that might not happen, and for me that looks like leadership.
Yeah, I think so, but it just comes natural to me. I just see it as logic. I just see it as the way it should be. It's the right thing to do. And to my mind is, I don't want to spend a load of money on a campaign and it just then fall flat. I'd rather have something that works over time and gives you the things you want and gains you the respect from everyone. Because for me, supporting people is not about giving sweets out to them type of scenario. It's the right, giving them perks and discounts and of things, and support them when they need it. That's what's important. Put the money in the right place at the right time. But it is difficult sometimes to get people to see it. And the trouble with some big companies is you give them something, they don't do it, and then they'll do it when it's their idea type of scenario, when it suits them, rather than actually getting ahead of the curve. For my mind, get ahead of that curve, that's when you really, really get it. So
Paul, one question that we ask all of our guests, whose leadership inspires you and why?
Many people inspire me, but probably a combination of two. Probably mentioned them earlier. Alex Ferguson. I just think him dealing with the stars of Man United and all the people around him at that time, to the level of protection he gave them. But then when you hear about the hairdryer scenario in the dressing room and throwing the football boot at Beckham, that type of thing. Not saying that's the right thing to do, by the way, but just that sort of style of leadership in terms of protecting, but also holding to account behind closed doors is one. If you could combine that with Steve Hewitt, Gymshark, I have immense admiration for him and what he's taught me from the culture, understanding, and just the sheer sort of empathy an ability to communicate with vast numbers of people. I can't actually do that in the same way that Steve does, but I really love that sort of style, and it's a level of honesty that Steve has brought to Gymshark at the time. I've really taken so much on board, so those two to me are a bit of a combination. So that's where we'll be.
Paul, thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining us on the Leadership Exchange podcast today. It's been absolutely fascinating exploring both that kind of, really focused business entrepreneurial kind of notion about how do we actually, deliver things that people want and stay in the real world. But with that, this ability that you seem to have developed to be open to learning, to kind of stay curious, to stay open to what the future might be and what people from a different generation might have to contribute, and ultimately to combine that in ways which create, fantastic brands that people really want to buy, do extraordinary things in the world. And I guess, as a Chelsea fan, I wish you well with Birmingham City Football Club, because you're probably right. This may be your biggest leadership challenge to date. But thanks again for being with us, Paul.
No,
It's been an
thanks very much.
pleasure.
At least you're blue.
And to those of you listening, thank you for joining us again. And we look forward to you joining us again next time. All the details of everything we've talked about today with Paul will, as always, be available in the show notes. And if you've enjoyed this episode, do please subscribe on whatever channel you're using and give us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you've got any suggestions for guests or for topics, do let us know those as well. We always look at them, and we're really keen to have the people who you'd like to hear from on this podcast. Otherwise, stay up to date with Leadership Exchanged, what we've got upcoming. And again, you'll find the details and the links in the show notes.